Thanks for doing this, Christina. I'm really excited to talk with you.
It's good to be with you.
So welcome, friends, to the Rooted in Light podcast. I am your host, Tuesday Rivera, and today I am here with a friend and a colleague and a mentor and an elder and probably all sorts of other ways to describe Christina Baldwin. Some of you might know her, well, maybe some of you know her in the way that I know her through her book with Anne Linnea, The Circle Way. But in researching for this interview, it was one of those moments where I was like, whoa, sometimes you don't even know who you know and what they've done. And so I've asked Christina's forbearance here. I'm actually going to read some of her bio. And Christina, thank you for letting me do this. But I feel like, you know what? I've known you for years and I didn't know this. So we're just going to let people know. We're just going to let them know. I'm actually going to put on my glasses. Everyone knows I wear glasses sometimes. So early years. Christina Baldwin was born in Montana into large families of English, Scots-Irish, her dad, and Swedish Norwegians, her mom. Tucked among buttes and farmland, her grandparents' homestead and honey business drew generations of descendants back for summers harvesting the garden, the honey crop, and imprinting on the land and vistas of the West. I wanted to make sure y'all knew that because it's going to come back later when we talk about Christina's new novel. But because she's a writer, here's the next line of her bio. Growing up in the Midwest, Christina's heart always faced the mountains. She loved the wind in her face, cowboy boots, reading, and journal writing. I read that and I was like, Christina, was that even hard for you to write? Like, it was just so evocative. I was like, okay, all right. Okay, but that's not it. That is her childhood. Let's get into her early 20s. So here we go. In her early 20s, Christina worked for the American Friends Service Committee as their youth affairs coordinator. She traveled across the U.S. and lived in Europe and the Middle East, working with peace efforts and later as a research assistant and freelance journalist. But after the publication of One to One in 1977, her interest in writing and story coincided with the rising women's movement and claiming memoir as a modern genre. She spent her 30s teaching, traveling, and writing self-help books. This life path culminated in her books. Okay, this is where we start the list of books, friends, which again, didn't know. Feel a little embarrassed by that, but Life's Companion, one book, Journal Writing as a Spiritual Practice, The Seven Whispers, Spiritual Practices for Times Like These, and Storycatcher, Making Sense of Our Lives Through the Power and Practice of Story. But then, in 1991, she started working with naturalist Anne Linnea. They developed a partnership to develop seminars designed to integrate personal growth with environmental activism. These weekend retreats combine time in nature with journal writing and circle conversations, which is how I came to know Christina, which of course is the practice of circle, which many of you have been with me in circles. So Christina and Anne began this practice and kind of reclaiming circle practice through so Christina wrote Calling the Circle, The First and Future Culture, and then co-authored with Anne, The Circle Way, A Leader in Every Chair. They traveled for 2 decades all over the world and trained Circle Way practitioners. And that's how I know Christina. That's how I met her as an elder, as a real force in the field and making change in the world. But that was not enough because now in December 22, Christina completed teaching what she taught for 32 years, The Self as a Source of Story, and she wrote a debut novel. So we today are going to have a conversation from that beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Journal writing all the way to the novel now. I have so many questions for you, but maybe I will just let you speak for a moment, Christina, and say hello and maybe anything you would like people to know about you.
I guess I sound kind of old, I laugh. And it is kind of interesting to listen to that rendition and look back on a life. And I think the word that comes to me right now about where I am now is culmination. And maybe we can revisit that down the road, because I would have always said probably the most important life decision I ever made was to start writing in a journal when I was 14 years old, because everything streamed off that, that I wasn't some child genius in any way, shape, or form. All you have to do is look at those early journals. But, little things like, his name is John, the word is love, he won't look at me in algebra class, my life is over,
Mm-hmm.
But that was 1960. And women were not yet a force the way that we are now. And women did not have voice in the culture the way we do now. So when I listen to you in that rendition of my life, I think of it almost like a plowshare. It's just like starting the journal writing movement, joining the feminist movement, capturing the drive for hosting different kinds of conversation where you and I met,
Uh-huh.
and the idea that Circle is a foundational multicultural gift to
Mm-hmm.
us in that process. So it all streams off of Dear Diary,
Well, I'm curious then, Christina, what made you pick up a journal at 14? Why journaling?
and Frank. And Frank,
Oh,
in
wow.
in the 8th grade in American education systems at that time, every kid read The Diary of Anne Frank. And I don't know if that is still true. I suspect it's been eroded.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I just thought she was my sister.
Wow.
And to actually see a girl,
Mm-hmm.
despite the complete difference of our circumstances, go, wow, this girl wrote. And she wrote to herself, and she wrote to this imaginary friend. She was very lonely being hidden around in World War II. And so she made up this imaginary friend called Kitty. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, the very first page of my experiment in journal writing, I remember sitting on my bed sobbing, writing, "Dear Kitty, as you have probably guessed by now, Anne is dead." And then just
Oh my,
bursting into
oh,
tears, just such deep identification with the need to have my own voice.
wow. That's beautiful, Christina. And what a way to start,
Yeah,
right? What a
yeah.
way to start. I mean, it certainly, I just want to say out loud, um, captures like even your imagination in that moment, right? That
Yeah.
you would write to this.
Yeah, and there's a kind of sweetness that I had at 14, just coming into world awareness that I think many 14-year-olds today don't have because they've been exposed to so many things.
Yeah.
My 14-year-old granddaughter sent me a graduation photo from 8th grade, and I go, I never looked like that, ever.
They look like little adults, right?
Yes.
Yeah, my daughter is 17, but I remember taking a picture of her on an 8th grade field trip. And I was like, I wasn't that cute or sophisticated.
No,
I was just
no.
kind of gangly and trying to figure it out for
Right.
sure.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that's wonderful. So
yeah.
I want to ask you like specifically about journal writing.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. One is I love journal writing. It has been like, I feel like in some ways, and I came to it quite late. Like I think I dabbled off and on through my life, but it really was in my 40s as I was ready or on the cusp of making big life changes that I really turned to journal writing. And now it is indispensable for me in the
Right.
way I understand myself, in the way I know myself, in the way
Mhm.
I track my own evolution. So I wanted to ask you, I love this. I found where you were called a pioneer in personal writing. And so, as a pioneer in personal writing, with kind of nearly, as I can tell, for like 40 years or so, kind of teaching and thinking about it, I want to know how your own understanding of journal writing has evolved, the power of it, or how journal writing itself has evolved since that time you picked up your pen at 14.
Well, when I picked up my pen at 14, I thought only Anne Frank and I had ever discovered the magic of this. And then in 10th grade, we studied American history and we read portions of Lewis and Clark. And so I thought, okay, Lewis and Clark and Anne and me.
Right. Got it. Uh-huh.
And then and then in 11th grade, we read Thoreau. And I went, okay, now it's Lewis and Clark and David and Anime and Henry David. So it was like, I just began being aware that maybe I was tapped into something. And it really was just kind of feeling my way through that sort of adolescence. I mean, how your journal started on page 1 versus how mine, very, very different for all kinds of reasons. Certainly personal maturity, but also the maturity of the culture. And the idea that you would talk to yourself, that you would talk to yourself on paper, and that would actually give you something. And I think it works so automatically that people gain the benefit without knowing what they're doing in a way. So that when you go to a blank page, and I find this especially true with handwriting because of the nerve interactions when you hold the pen and how your hand moves, it awakens a somatic connection between the eye and the brain and the heart, so that it's a very integrated process. So even if you just say, how am I? And you begin to respond to that, there's all kinds of things going on. It's a very different part of the brain if you're tapping on a keyboard. It works, but for me, I always start with handwriting.
That's amazing. I hadn't thought about the actual physical act, right? And Christina, how do you tell people to start journaling? Because I can imagine, folks are listening and like, well, if you got short 14, you weren't a good writer.
Right,
but now you've
my whole life at 14, right?
But how do you get people past what might be an internal block or internal judgment about what they're writing, perhaps? Like, how do you get people started?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways. One of the ways I love is called flow writing, and to set a timer, like set it for 7 minutes, and then just close your eyes and take a breath and kind of just, have whatever you're going to write with and on near you, but just like go inside and just take a few breaths. And when you open your eyes, whatever your gaze falls upon, just start there. So if I were doing it right now, I might just open my eyes and say, Tuesday's glasses look like 2 pearly oysters. And I would go right from there and not try to write about your glasses for 5 minutes, but just go, there are oysters on the beach below my house, and then and are they safe to eat because we live in Puget Sound? I mean, just that you just watch your thought process tumble forward, and almost without fail, by the end of 7 minutes, when a little timer goes off or your phone buzzes or whatever, you look back and you go, wow, I didn't know I was thinking about that. And I didn't know that if I started there, I'd end up over here looking at a relationship or remembering my mother or whatever, And then you can just underline the little gem that you gave yourself. And what happens to your mind when you do that in any kind of a pattern? Like in my classes, I used to say the first week, I want you to find only 5-minute segments.
Okay.
And find them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, but set the timer and make yourself stop. Because what happens is the mind goes, I better be ready. I want to give this person, I want to give my person something. And so your mind is like, ready, set, go. And you're writing away, and all of a sudden, insight, guidance, it just starts showing up. And the other thing that happens when you do a timed writing like that is you're frustrated when the timer goes off. You're not done.
Okay.
So
all right.
I say, okay, stop anyway. Stop anyway. And then pretty soon you're saying, well, I really want to write 15 minutes. Oh, okay, try that. And so but if I sat down and say the first exercise is to write for 15 or 30 minutes uninterrupted, people would freak.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So interesting. So the somatic part of it, I hadn't thought through and like how that all functions. But the other thing that is, it feels like if you kind of know you're going to do this a couple times a day, just like if you know you're going to take a picture a couple times a day, like your seeing begins to
Yeah,
shift, right? Like
absolutely.
everything begins to shift because then you're kind of moving from this place of expression, actually. I think that's so interesting. I hadn't thought about, I tend to think about journaling for me personally as a way to understand what I'm experiencing or what I have experienced, but I haven't thought about it as like shifting the actual way I experience or shifting the way I view simply by using this tool. It might seem very obvious to you, but I'd love to ask you how or why, but I think how is my real question. How is journaling a spiritual practice, or how does it connect you to the sacred, and how that might be different from other kinds of reflection? But I'm curious about the kind of the explicit link between journaling and the spiritual.
Well, it calms me down and it slows me down. And what I've learned over time, sometimes when people start writing, they get very anxious that their thoughts are tumbling ahead of them so fast. They're going, I'm losing it, I'm losing it. But what
Mhm.
happens is we self regulate. We regulate with the speed at which we can write, we regulate with our own
Mm.
breathing. And so it becomes a kind of meditation. And almost like in many meditations have a way of like holding prayer beads, whether you're doing
Uh-huh.
um, even a rosary, that there's something you recite, but you're moving things through your hands. And
Mhm.
so I'm moving words through my hands. I'm moving ink through my hands. Now, there's a little handout on my website under resources called Cursive or Cursor. And it really talks about some of the neurology of this in a fun way.
Great. Well, if people wanna see that, that's ChristinaBaldwin.com,
Mhm.
correct?
You're
And you
right.
could look that up. And, I really appreciate that. You're right, there is something ancient about our hands being engaged, right? And
Mhm.
there's something we know, even if we, don't know that we know it.
Well, look at some of the things now. I mean, in the airport, you can buy a coloring book for adults before you get on the plane, right? I think people are looking for alternatives to this kind of frenetic vibe that we're living in the modern world. You have
Yeah.
Zen tango, you have workshops on soul collage. I mean, just fun things that really are designed to help us get into the creative part of our minds and not be so overwhelmed all the time by what's going by.
But I mean, yes, I think that that's true. I actually laugh. I bought a tablet to decrease my paper use, and I've started doing tracing apps on it. Again, things like airports, things like. So I think that you're right. Now people really do have a sense of this, but I'm thinking when you wrote that first book about it, people didn't have a sense of it. So I'm curious, or how journal writing could be internally revolutionary. I'm assuming because I know you that at some point that became externally revolutionary in some ways
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
But I'm curious, like, what was that impetus, Christina, from moving from I write journals, it's important to me to access my own creativity, to I'm going to help others. And that's going to be part of my vocation.
Well, when I was 24, I had been living abroad for a while. And when I was living in England, I came across the diaries of Anais Nin and some other, I was kind of intrigued with the whole Bloomsbury group and Virginia Woolf. And I went, this is a literary form. It had never occurred to me it was anything other than self exploratory. But living in Europe, I began to glimpse that it was much bigger than I ever thought, that there was a history to diary and journal keeping that and it coincided, that moment coincided with kind of a feminist awakening to where are the women's voices,
Yes,
you
yes.
know? And how long have women even been allowed to be literate? And then I stumbled into sort of the Victorian era in which all men of stature in the empire kept journals of their accomplishments, and their wives all kept journals about their husbands, and so there was that. And I brought that back to the US, and I went to the University of Minnesota Extension and said, I've been doing this kind of in secret for 10 years. I want to know if there's any classes on it. And the people who were the registrars there for the summer courses said, you've been doing it for 10 years? You're the teacher.
Oh.
And
okay.
And I was kind of up for that, I was mid-20s, casting around, coming back to the US, going, I don't know what I want to do. And it certainly wasn't a paying day job kind of thing, but I got a paying day job, and then I just began teaching. And the very first class I had was 10 women and 2 men.
Okay.
And everybody came in and sat in little rows. And I asked them, well, what are you writing about? What are you putting on the page? And within 20 minutes, I just said, I can't stand in the front of this room. Let's circle up. Let's circle these desks and have a conversation about what we're doing. And that we really sort of co-taught that class together. It was just so exploratory and delicious. And people said things that had never occurred to me. One woman sort of had a journal in every room of her house, and
wow.
I know. And then there was a man who was an antiquarian book dealer, and his family. He was the 3rd generation male in his family who kept a diary in which he noted something about every day of his life from the age of 12. It was like this bar mitzvah into journal writing, and it was great fun. And I just, then shortly after that, I taught that class several variations.
Okay.
And then I decided to put it in a book, just because, why not? I'm a writer, I should have a book. So
all right.
That's how my very first book, 1-to-1, came about. And I went to New York when that book was about half finished, and there was the first or second gathering of the Women's International Writing Guild. And I'd seen this tiny little ad in Ms. And I wrote the organizer and I said, can I come? And can I talk about journal writing? And she said, well, all the keynotes are full, and I don't know who you are, you're nobody, but I'll give you 10 minutes at the beginning of a session. So I took those 10 minutes and said, if anybody wants to talk more about journal writing and what this means, my room number is such and such, meet me at 4:00. I had 40 women crammed into this little conference bedroom, all with their pens, like, okay, what do we do? And I thought, I really, that was the moment I said, this is something. This is something. And then when I finished the book, and it got published, they had to create a new category in the Library of Congress for it. So the new category was therapeutic uses of journal writing.
Oh my goodness.
So that was fun.
Okay. So Christina, I mean, I understand that this is an old story to you. You said a number of remarkable things. Oh, I just, called up Extension and said, do you have anyone to teach this? Oh, okay, I'll teach it. And then I thought, oh, sure, I'll write a book about that. And I'll, I see an ad in Ms. Magazine and I respond. And I actually think that there's a lot underneath that about your courage and and I guess I don't want to put too many words on it, but I talk with people all of the time who are kind of like, oh, like in whispers, I think I have this thing to do, but I don't know. I think it might not help people, or it's really not a big deal, or maybe I'm not ready for it. And I'm just curious if you have any wisdom or advice for especially women. That's mostly who I'm working with, who just are kind of like, maybe I have this little light that could shine, but I'm not sure how to get there.
I, of course, have had hesitance and shyness and a sense of inadequacy from time to time. But I also feel co-inhabited inside myself
Mm-hmm.
by a drive to fulfill purpose, a drive to contribute.
Okay.
And so I just think I'm wired that way,
Mm-hmm.
but not like in a specialty sense. But I think a lot of humanity, if we're not too ultimately damaged, we are wired that way. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to thread a needle. I'll teach you. You know,
Uh-huh.
it's like I can put a sentence together, so can you. And that I've always been that way. I've always delighted in passing on my own discovery and been excitable about it.
Mm.
So it's interesting for me because I am very enthusiastic. I know I'm inspiring to people, and at the same time, what I'm inspiring people to do is quiet.
Ah.
You know, is
Ah.
first quiet and then action. So when Anne Linnea and I intersected in the middle of our lives in the beginning of our 40s, she was working with burned out climate activists, environmental activists who were just
Okay.
out there all the time
Mm-hmm.
and going home exhausted and didn't have an internalized replenishment factor.
Right.
I'm
Yes.
working with middle class, fairly privileged, mostly white women who are doing a lot of introspection about their childhoods and their marriages and are they good mothers and all of that kind of thing. But I want to get them out there,
Yes. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and I'm saying my generation, sort of the older boomer generation, was the first generation of women in the West that have really grabbed hold of opportunity and power and gone for it as a
Mm-hmm.
collective, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going, we are Rolls Royces revving in neutral. For God's sake, let's put it in gear. So that's what Anne and I started doing is we started teaching, blending these two cohort groups and bringing them together and teaching a weekend seminar called Women and the Planet and helping the environmentalists pass along the information that they had and the fiery passion for activism to the housewives, you know, to the beautiful wives, and then saying to the beautiful wives, okay, join them. How are you going to join them? How, you know, if you want your children and grandchildren to have a healthy planet, then what can you do? And so that was kind of the mix. And of course, we're sitting in a circle with a candle in the middle as we have this conversation. And out of that, Anne and I became kind of awestruck at what was
Mm.
occurring
Mm.
in the group process during a 48-hour weekend. And we said, you know, people are so surprised at what they're saying to themselves and to each
Aha.
other. You know, the commitments and vows and vulnerability and those kinds of things, that something's happening here. And that's when we went, maybe it's the circle. You know, maybe it's not so dependent who the personalities are, but maybe there's something
Mm.
about this shape that really began forming this field of possibility. And so that became then a natural bridge for us into the work that overtook our lives for the next 25 years. But it's all connected.
It's I mean, you can feel the thread, right? You can feel like you
Mhm,
just took the next
mhm,
step. So
mhm.
actually, one of my questions for you was going to be about, as I looked at your bio, I was like, oh, I want to ask her about, turning towards the next expression and how what you've learned about kind of turning towards the next expression, because often that does mean leaving some things from the old expression behind. And so what can you tell us about that you've learned in these iterations of your work and self?
Yes, sometimes people look at my life or my titles of books and they go, well, she took a left turn, but it's not a left turn.
Mm,
It's just a sphere or a Mobius strip,
mm,
actually.
mhm.
And people say things like, if you want to heal the world, heal yourself. I go, great, fine.
Uh-huh.
And, then it's like, then you need to start behaving differently.
Uh-huh.
It's not just enough to go, I've got it. It's like, what are you going to do on the street?
Right.
And so my writing that I've put out has always been what I call inform, inspire, and activate.
Mm.
And that journal writing and my early writings are all about inform yourself who you are, inform yourself why you came here.
Mm-hmm.
And I look now into our culture and I go, there are a lot of people who are not asking that question.
Yes.
And
yes.
we need people to ask that question. And I keep talking to my 20-year-old grandson and saying, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
I go, it's okay that you don't know. It's okay that you're tossing around, but there is a reason.
Right.
Whatever religious philosophy, spiritual philosophy you have or don't have, let's just say you're here for some reason. And that the journey of young adulthood is to begin to put your foot on that path. And the journey of midlife is to really walk it. And the journey of old life is to harvest it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, this really tracks. I mean, of course, you know this, but when we met, it was in the context of the Circle Way and using these practices. And I found that you were one of the few elders who was making explicit connection with issues of race, issues of gender, issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. Because I think there was a bit of I'm going to use my word and you can correct me, but a bit of a fairy tale that somehow these practices would just result in more equity.
Yeah.
Versus a real intentional turning towards, we do this internal work, we do this relational work so that the world is better too. Like obviously we want ourselves to be better, we want our relationships to be better, but we have a responsibility bigger than that as well.
So I always say world peace is what's happening in the 3-meter distance around your own body.
Mm.
And that if we make sure in our daily lives that we are doing everything we can to sustain justice and peace within the radius of our personal lives, then it has huge collective impact.
Mm-hmm.
It's like building a kind community, building a luminous community. You know? So even if you don't think you have influence, if you don't think your life is very big, if you're 90 years old and in a wheelchair somewhere, you can still roll down the hall and love the folks in front of you.
Right.
And when my mother was getting quite frail in her mid-90s, and she always said to me, so what's my job now? What's my job now? And I said to her, your job now is to let love all the way in and send love all the way out. Yeah?
That's wonderful.
So I believe that we all have agency. We all have sovereignty. We all have capacity, and it shrinks and expands. And sometimes it's very internalized or very personal. And then other times it's like, right now, time to go for it. And as we're resisting in the United States what's happening here, people are saying, well, look at all those old white people. I go, yeah, it's our time to be on the street. It's appropriate for the grandmas and grandpas to be out there.
That's
because we're trying to help the people who are raising children, who are trying to make a living in the midst of all this mess. So let's hit the streets.
I love it. I love it. I love that. And actually, Christina, this brings us right into this new novel that you've written. I mean, it might not seem to, right? The novel might seem like a left turn, but it feels like there is a really clear through line. And I thought you said it so beautifully, and I'm going to read something back to you that, you said, but you're in the novel is called The Beekeeper's Question, and it's set in Western Montana, which folks might remember from the bio that you were raised. And it talks about so it deals with multi-generational family dynamics, racial tensions, and the home front experience. And then I was so struck by what might learning about this teach us about societal upheaval, democracy and authoritarianism, and making sacrifices for the common good. And so this is exactly what you just talked about. Like, and you brought in your 90-year-old mother. So maybe can you bring us into the world of your novel a little bit and tell us about that?
Yeah. I wanted to, on a personal level, I wanted to give myself at age 70, when I had passed the Circle Way work, into the nonprofit, thecircleway.net, where it is flourishing in a more collective sense. And Anne and I just gave to the Circle Way everything that we had produced and said, please, expand these, hold these, give them away. There's just all kinds of resources out there for doing that. And then I thought, well, what do I want to do now as a writer? So I thought, well, why not try something that I had kind of this dream forever, but my life had been carried along in other ways. So I thought I'll teach myself to write a novel.
Wow.
And so that was my personal way of putting off the doldrums of retirement,
Okay, all right.
I still have a purpose, right? It's not like, well, I retired, now I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, no, now I do know what I'm doing. I'm writing this book. And then the next level out was really a sense of watching the deterioration of many of the life values that had been passed into me through generations. I thought, I want to write a story about sort of ordinary white people that reminds us, white people, that we come from something that we struggled with in this country around racism and genocide, et cetera. But there is this kind of core sense of values and work ethic and the Good Samaritan kind of, the Judeo-Christian values are deeply encoded in Western civilization. And I wanted to do something that was just explore how we might live this. So I went back in time to World War II because we're fascinated with it. And I asked myself, why can't we stop reading and writing about this era? And of course, I'm going, because it never is over.
Right.
Now we see that this huge mushrooming again of fascism. But even before that, because I started this book actually before this became so acute, I thought I want to do something that kind of reattaches white people to that core through the stories of this family. And then I asked myself, what makes a classic? What makes a classic book? And I reread To Kill a Mockingbird.
Okay.
And I came away going, in a classic book, there's a protagonist who takes a step that the community needs him to take, but is not ready to have him take. And so he's punished for it.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So I thought, I don't want a single hero in this book. I want the family to be the protagonist. And so you have the Cooper family, through various things that happen in the story, has to stand forth and acknowledge and deal with the horrible history of the Blackfeet on the land in which my family and the Cooper family homesteaded. And so I did a lot of deep education about that history. I thought, In Montana, that's where the racism really was focused at the beginning,
Okay.
was around how to get rid of the Indians so that we can have the land,
Right.
and so that's the part that I thought about racism in America that I thought I could begin to tackle. And then it took me 3 years to find a member of the Blackfeet tribe who was willing to stand alongside me as I wrote and read the way that Native people are presented in the
Uh-huh.
story, educate me.
Uh-huh.
Um, and when I started getting feedback from her, when I introduced a character who's mixed blood, and she wrote back, "I love Jesse," I went,
Ah,
"Whew," you know?
yeah. Yeah.
And
Wow.
I've had several people now. I mean, it's iffy to be a white person writing
Yes.
across that kind of diversity. Um,
Yes.
and I would not have done it without the mentorship and friendship of this woman. But I'm getting feedback now, both from Native readers and also from white people that have had long term connections into the Native communities across the US and Canada, especially Western tribes, that I did it, that they said, "You did it right. You did it
All
okay."
right.
So that's good. People felt seen. And so I wanted the book to really have an educational thread to it without being too lecturing. But
Uh-huh.
no one should come into this book and exit the book without learning some things about what we white people did in colonizing across this continent.
Christina, you said so much important there. One of the things I guess I want to just circle back to is, and it's not that sensitivity readers aren't important, but it sounds like you actually entered into relationship with someone,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
Rather than kind of check my work, right? It's like actually let's be
mhm.
in relationship here. And I just think there's something, in all of our race-based work, in all of our spiritual work, like there's no way around like actually moving into relationship with people, right? There's just like there's no like quick fix way we're going to do it. There's
No.
no strategy that's good enough if we're not actually in relationship. And so I wanted to kind of pull that out. But the thing you said before that I also wanted to say, or maybe mirror back to you and see what you think, is you said I wanted to kind of tell a story of kind of ordinary white people and kind of what they did through a family, and that there was a sense of values to return to.
Mhm,
And I'm curious because I think so much of the discourse in this country um, is as if two things. One is that white folks don't have a history to refer to actually lean on, to actually do good
mhm,
work, right? As if it
mhm.
must kind of pop up like completely created now as new folks. And so I'm curious because it feels like there's a there's a turning towards the history that you're doing without a shame that is often accompanies turning towards that history. And I'm curious what you might say about that.
Hmm. There's a difference between reckoning and shame. And I mean, years ago, I used to just have the thought, oh, none of my family historically lived in the South. We never
Uh-huh.
enslaved people. I'm off,
Right. Yeah.
I'm okay,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, what about the native people? And,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
I think journal writing gives me a place to go back to and really explore the messier bits, explore the shadow parts of myself, and my family's history. And yes, they are people of their times, and you still can make choices of integrity,
Mhm.
you know? Um, there's racism. I mean, the Cooper family is dealing in the story with one way. The Baldwin family dealt with another way, and
Uh-huh.
part of the gift of fiction, when people say, well, there's so much of your family history in this book, why didn't you just do a memoir? And I go, because in fiction you can fix things. You know, in fiction, you can provide insight that maybe didn't come to your Uncle Harry,
Uh-huh.
but in the story, it happens. In the story, there's the opportunity to create a community that has a whole range. People who never want to talk about what they did to the Injuns, and there's an antagonist in the story who stands up at one point and yells at the Cooper family, what's done is done. They
Mhm.
lost, we won.
Right. Right.
And there's a lot of that kind of uh, worldview
Uh-huh. Mhm.
in
Certainly.
in America and Canada and around the world right now, right? And yet there's another figure that rises up to meet him when he says that
Uh-huh.
and says, just because it was done doesn't mean it was done justly,
Mm.
and the characters in the book find a way to talk about this without just diving into shame, because
Ah,
shame incapacitates you.
yes.
Shame,
Yeah.
shame is a way of not doing anything about it.
Mhm.
And
Right.
I
Yes,
want
absolutely.
I want people to do something about it. So I have private vows to the relationship that I made and to the people and to the
Mm.
land and
Mm.
to the conversations around restitution and reclamation. And, these are huge issues that certainly won't get resolved in my lifetime, but I want to be part of that conversation and I'm willing to go to the uncomfortable edges.
Talk to me about talk to me about this novel, this process of writing, and your connection to your ancestral wisdom.
Mm.
Yeah, what did that look like?
When I started writing the novel, my father was living down the road 10 miles
Mm.
from us, and he had moved here at 86 when he was widowed from his second marriage, and he
Okay.
lived here to 98.
Wow.
And talk about a man who continued his purpose. He was still sitting on several boards on the day he died. He was, a little guy, like a little garden gnome. I referred to him, and people would say, "Your dad is so cute," and I go, "Do you listen to what comes out of his mouth?" Because he was a man who streamed a sense of moral code and history. And so in the book, the beekeeper, Leo
Mhm.
Cooper, is really based on my father's father, who was an exceptional man for his time.
Mhm.
For example, he was on the board of this tiny little local bank, which failed in the 1930s,
Mm.
and a bunch of farmers lost money. It took him 20 years, but he paid back every family what they had lost in the
Wow.
1930s
Oh my goodness.
because he was president of the bank board and it shouldn't have happened, right?
Wow.
So he practiced the institution of social justice as far as he could reach. You know, was it his fault in the middle of the depression? Probably not, but he took responsibility. So it's I come from that lineage.
Uh-huh.
That's in my social DNA whirling around in there. So the book, I really wanted to bring my grandfather's voice into it and play with it. He was a beekeeper and the Methodist minister in the town. And and so is Leo Cooper in the book. And then a whole bunch of it I made up. But the family constellation around that was really a beautiful way to retouch that lineage. And because my father was alive and my father had grown up keeping bees with my grandfather, we had many conversations about that period of rural American life. And my father loved to think about the sociology and history of things.
Okay.
So he's the one who said the revolution on the American home front was profound during that war.
Mm,
And two things he cited were about, said at the beginning of the war, 80% of farming in this country was done by horses. At the end of the war, 80% was done by machine.
amazing. Amazing. Wow.
And it's like
Wow.
the pressure on the American farmland to produce not only for the American civilian population, the American military population, and then to feed the Allies.
Right. Right.
So there were huge quotas and stress. And the thing I want to say though about the book is fun. You know, it
Oh,
has,
great.
yeah, it has young couples falling in love and being surprised and having babies, and you know, and a lot of country wisdom, and the maiden
Mm,
auntie who's the doctor in the valley, and how a lot of women sort of 60 and over go, I want to be Doc. You know, I love Doc. She's such a strong character. And then we watch the growth of this young Irish war bride from age 16 to 26, and how she takes on the whole beekeeping and what that means to her, and an exploration of Celtic shamanism that streams through her. The bees
okay.
begin, you know, the bees begin talking to her. And then you have the native wisdom, and then you have some good old solid progressive Methodism. So it's there's a lot going on, but it's not polemic. It's not a
Uh-huh.
it's not a
Yeah.
lecture in story form.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
ran
That's
that
great.
litmus test by myself a number of times, because I just, and then book clubs are finding it a great read. And it's been great fun in the last 6 months, both on Zoom or in person, to just sit down and listen to people get the book. Because when you're a writer, you go, well, I hope they get it. I hope they get it.
Of
So,
course.
yeah, and the audiobook is coming out now, so that it's in print, ebook, and audio. And I'm hoping it has a long and happy life.
Yeah, and I'm assuming people can get it anywhere. I mean, I was
They
on your
can.
website, but,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not selling it through the website because that's just too complex these days, but you can get it on Bookshop. You can go into a local bookstore. It's in Ingram so that they can find it and order it up, and and it's on the big A, the big
yeah.
Amazon A.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's all
Absolutely.
over online. So
So you can so just friends, just like to not to put too fine of a point on, you can get the beekeeper's question. You
yeah,
know, you can get
yeah.
that anywhere. You can read this story that begins to ask us through narrative, through storytelling, through fiction, like what is our responsibility and how have people perhaps navigated that before us, right?
Well, right. And these people are living through the war against fascism, and they don't know how it's going to come out. And we're kind of there
Mhm.
again.
Yeah,
When we
yeah,
don't know how it's going to come out, right?
right,
And
right.
there's sacrifice and cost, and putting up the food together, and
Mhm.
picnics and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and you know, it's like life in that time. And it people tell me that there's one woman who says, I'm reading this book once a year for the rest of my life, because I
Mm,
just need to sit down with Leo and Doc and listen to them and
mm.
be with them on that front porch and so forth. So,
Well, my final question to you, Christina, thank you so much. I do want to ask you um around this, whether it's the first books you wrote around journal writing, whether it's like noticing circle practice and writing about that, whether it's this novel, there is a way that you must tune in to what wants to be expressed through you.
mhm.
And I'm just curious if you might share what you know about getting to your own self-expression, because so many people who are listening are really, that is the question in front of them. There's something here, there's some purpose, there's something that wants to be expressed, and they want to know how.
Well, you sit in the question. I mean, that's why it's not the beekeeper's answer. It's,
Great, great. Yeah.
and it's really about the question. And the beekeeper's question is different for every one of us. But it is, what is driving? What is the driving foundational support under your life? What's holding you and pushing you at the same time? What's embracing you as a human being and saying, I'm so glad you're part of it right now, and now do something. Do something with that. Do something with that.
Uh-huh.
And how do you get to that? I think I would say don't be afraid of your ambivalence. Don't be afraid of
Mm.
your despair and grief.
Mm.
Allow the wash to come over you.
Mm.
I went up into the mountains earlier this week and I was standing by this river and then there's just this wall of trees that ends in a mountaintop on the other side. I just stood there and I was just weeping for nothing was going through. You are grieving, it was just the beauty of it and um, getting myself ready to come down the mountain
Mhm.
and come back into the fray. So I
Right.
think don't be afraid of anything in your range of emotions.
Ah.
And if you feel and if you feel like you're despairing in some way or you might do harm to yourself or someone else, just sit on your hands. That's what I do is I literally sit on my hands and go, I will do no harm to
Mm.
myself or anyone else. And so I'm going to sit here until I'm calm and ready to step forward again.
Beautiful.
But especially midlife is full of that swing because we begin to feel it's time.
Yeah.
It's time, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be some big global expression.
Mhm.
It could be rescuing cats, but just to do your piece of the huge
Yeah.
jigsaw puzzle that we
Yeah.
are. And I love writing my blog because it gives me a chance to kind of like dash down, let's explore this together. I wrote a big thing about how we're all just one piece of this amazing jigsaw puzzle. And I can't save the world, but I can do my piece. And let it happen. Let it happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christina. This is so rich. I always leave people with a practice, and I feel like you've given us so many. Um, uh, but I think I want to invite people just to that first practice you talked about, like at the front of this podcast,
Mhm,
which is like the 5-minute journaling exercise where you move
mhm.
your hand, you close your eyes, you take a breath, you open it, you see something, and you just start writing. And I want to encourage people to go to your website because that's where your blog is and all of these resources are, to go to where they want to buy your book, The Beekeeper's Question. I think there's, or and the circleway.net. There are lots of places that folks can
Yeah.
learn more about your work and what you're up to and what you've been up to in the world. And just want to thank you so much from myself. This is lovely. I'm so glad to reconnect with you and also, to reconnect with you. But as I said at the beginning, learn more about you.
Right. How
So
fun is that?
yeah,
You know?
absolutely, absolutely. So I happen to be part of the Luminous community, and I think I'm going to suggest our next book club book is The Beekeeper's Question. So thank you so much
Oh,
for
I think
that.
you'll like it. And
Yeah,
then I'll come and chat with you if you want, just about that story.
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Christina, and everyone else. Have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed listening. Whatever, subscribe, all the things they tell you to do,
All
please
those
do them.
things, right.
Exactly. But really just send this podcast on to someone else, this particular episode on to someone else that you think would like it. So thank you so much, everyone.